Hello everybody, and welcome back to Type 1 Diabetes Explained. Today we are going to do some carb counting practice problems. Now, if you are looking for a complete guide on how to count the carbohydrates in food, check out our other video linked in the description and in the top right hand corner of your screen for a complete tutorial and detailed step-by-step process on how to count the carbs in the food that you are eating. In this video, I'll be guiding you through some practice problems that will progressively get more advanced. The calculations that we will be doing, especially near the end of the video, are some of the more difficult carb counting problems you will encounter, accounting for irregular serving sizes, blood sugar changes, correction ratios, and foods without nutrition information. If you are new to carb counting, this may not be the video for you. Try checking out the complete tutorial we mentioned previously. Most people will not need to do these type of problems on a regular basis, but successfully counting carbs in difficult situations is a good way to know you've mastered the process. With that said, here we go. It's encouraged for you to pause the video and try the problem yourself before I walk through it. So let's start off the day with breakfast. You are planning on having some toasted whole cereal for breakfast. Here's the nutrition label for the cereal, and let's say that you're planning on eating just one serving. So, take a few minutes, pause the video, and calculate how many net carbohydrates are in one serving of toasted wholes. Okay, let's walk through this here. You are planning on eating one serving, and there are 34 grams of carbs per serving. But this cereal also has 7 grams of fiber. So, remember to calculate net carbs, we subtract the fiber, leaving us with 27 grams of net carbs per serving. Now, of course you don't want to eat this cereal dry, so let's add some milk. Here's the nutrition label, and you are planning on having 2 servings of milk, one in the cereal and one just to drink. Go ahead and calculate the number of carbs in 2 servings of milk. Alright, remember that we are having 2 servings, and we see from the nutrition label that there are 12 grams of carbs per serving and no fiber or sugar alcohols. So, 12 grams of carbs multiplied by the 2 servings that we are having is 24 grams of net carbohydrates. But remember that we're also having the cereal for breakfast, so we can't forget to include that. Now, we add the 27 grams of net carbohydrates from the cereal, and we get 51 grams of total carbohydrates for the meal. Not too bad. That might be a little sugary for breakfast, but it'll do. Now that we know how many carbohydrates are in the food, we have to convert that to units of insulin. We have 51 grams of carbohydrates, and let's say that we are going to use an insulin to carb ratio of 1 to 8. So, to determine the number of units that we need, we divide the total number of carbs by the number of carbs indicated in our insulin ratio, and we get 6.38 units of insulin. Now, a lot of insulin pumps can deliver this specific amount of insulin, but if you're using a pen or other method, you can decide whether to round up or down based on how you think your body will respond to the food. Now it's time for a morning snack, and you're going to have a cereal bar, apple flavored to be exact. So, take a look at the nutrition label and calculate how many carbs are in one serving of a cereal bar. Okay, here we go. Since we're just having one serving, we can see that there are 25 grams of carbs per serving and 1 gram of fiber. So, we take the carbs and subtract the fiber, and we have 24 grams of net carbohydrates. Now, to convert this number into units of insulin, we're going to use a 1 to 6 insulin to carb ratio. So, we divide 24 grams by 6 grams per unit to get 4 units of insulin. Great. Now things are going to get a little bit harder. Now, in the real world, you won't be eating just 1 or 2 items for a meal. You'll probably be eating many different items, each of which require you to count the carbs for them individually. So, for lunch, we're going to have several different foods. Let's have a sandwich, an apple, a bag of chips, and a cookie. Now, in order to find the carbohydrates of the total meal, we have to find the carbohydrates in each one of these items. So let's begin with the sandwich. The sandwich has 2 slices of bread, 4 slices of meat, 1 slice of cheese, half of a tomato sliced, and 2 tablespoons of condiment. Now, since there are so many different ingredients, I'm going to give you a condensed nutrition label with just the stuff that you might need to take into account so that things don't get too cluttered here. You might also want a sheet of paper if you have one. Take a few minutes and calculate the carbohydrates for each of these items, also adding them up at the end. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too hard. We'll start over here with the bread. we see that it has 10 grams of carbs per serving, and then we subtract the 1 gram of fiber. Now remember to look at the serving size. We see that it only has 1 slice per serving, but we want 2 slices for our sandwich, so we need to multiply the carbs by 2. So the bread accounts for 18 grams of carbohydrates. Now onto the meat. We see that it has 4 grams of carbs per serving, and the amount that we're going to eat is the same as the serving size, so we're having 1 serving, meaning that it accounts for 4 grams of carbs. Now for the cheese, it doesn't have any carbs, so we don't even have to worry about the serving size since it won't affect our carb count. The tomato has 6 grams of carbs per serving, but we also see that 1 serving is a whole tomato and we only want half of one. So we multiply the number of carbs by 1/2 and we get 3 grams of carbs. For the condiment, we see that there are 7 grams per serving and we are only going to eat 1 serving, but there are also 2 grams of sugar alcohols. Remember that we have to subtract half of the total number of sugar alcohols from the total. So take the 2 grams and divide it by 2, and we subtract 1 gram from the total, and we end up with 6 grams of carbs. Now that we have accounted for everything, we can add them all together. So 18 plus 4 plus 0 plus 3 plus 6 is 31 grams of carbs. Great, we're now finished with this sandwich. We'll keep that number for later. Now, this may seem like a lot of math for just one sandwich, and I agree. Nobody wants to do this much work every time they are planning to eat. However, most of us often eat very similar things on most days, so it may be helpful to do a pretty detailed carb count once and then write that number down for when you eat it again in the future. However, do remember that if you change certain elements, it will probably change the carb count, so it may be worth doing another carb count if you're making small changes to what you're eating. Now onto the apple. Go ahead and calculate the net carbohydrates in the apple. Alright, this one is pretty simple. We are having 1 serving at 34 grams of carbs per serving and 5 grams of fiber. So we take the carbohydrates and subtract the fiber and we end up with 29 grams of net carbs. Great, we'll hold on to that number as well while we calculate the rest. Here's the information for the chips. Give this one a go. Similar to the apple, this one is pretty simple. There are 16 grams of carbohydrates and 1 gram of fiber. So take the total carbohydrates and subtract off the fiber, and we get 15 grams of net carbs. Perfect, we're breezing through these. Now for the cookie, but wait, it was homemade from scratch, so we don't have any real nutrition information on it. So what do? Well, since we don't have much information, the best thing that we can do is try and find a similar cookie, which we do have information for, and base our carb count off of that. For our purposes here today, you can go to the first link in the description, which is a simulated cookie recipe website put together for this video. Try and find the recipe that will produce the cookie that is most similar to ours here. Great, hopefully you found a cookie that you think is the most similar to this one. The one that we are going to use is this one, the classic chocolate cookie. Now, some of you may have chosen the complete chocolate, but one important thing to look at when finding similar foods to count carbs is the weight. How much something weighs can often be very helpful in determining how similar certain items are. We see that the complete chocolate weighs 124 grams for one cookie, but we remember that our cookie weighs just 65 grams. So the complete chocolate is not going to be super accurate since it weighs almost double the amount of the cookie that we are looking for. If you kept looking and found the classic chocolate, we see that it weighs much closer to the weight of our cookie. So let's use that one for our carb count. We see that it has 25 grams of carbohydrates and 1 gram of fiber. So we can go ahead and subtract the fiber from the carbs and get 24 grams of net carbohydrates. Great. Now, it is important to remember that when searching for carbohydrates in food on the internet, that there are many different variations of different types of foods that can have very, very different carb counts. Just like some of you might have chosen the complete chocolate chip cookie since it was pretty similar and near the top of the list, it's not hard to accidentally or unknowingly use wrong or less than ideal information in your carb counts. Always try and find the most accurate information possible, and definitely pay attention to your blood sugar after eating to ensure that you aren't going high or low. Now that we have calculated the carbs for each piece of the meal, we can calculate the total carbs simply by adding everything together, and we get a total of 99 grams of carbs. Perfect. Now we're almost done. To convert that to units of insulin, we are going to use a 1:5 ratio, and we get 19.8 units of insulin. Okay, we've finally completed this carb count. Now, rest assured that counting carbs certainly won't take this long. As you'll get more and more practice, a lot of people get to the point where they're able to do all of what we just did completely in their head. Now we can move on to our afternoon snack. Now, there's one thing that we haven't been taking into account when you're counting carbohydrates and dosing for meals, and that's your blood sugar. If your blood sugar is high right before a meal, then you will probably want to give more insulin than normal to help keep your blood sugar down, and if you are low, you probably don't need as much insulin to dose with. Let's say that right before your afternoon snack you went outside and got some exercise, so your blood sugar is running low, and you're planning on having a bottle of fizzy flavored sugary water. Now, that may not be the best choice, but it's all you have at the moment and you need something to bring your blood sugar up. So, go ahead and count the carbohydrates in the drink and we'll consider your current blood sugar in a moment. So, the fizzy flavored sugary water has 55 grams of carbs and 6 grams of sugar alcohols. So, we take the carbs and subtract off half of the sugar alcohols and we get net carbohydrates of 52 grams. Now on to the insulin calculation. Let's say that your blood sugar is currently 65 after exercising, so you probably want to use less insulin. One way to account for your blood sugar is to use a correction ratio. 1:30 is an example of a correction ratio, and they basically tell you how many units of insulin to give or subtract based on how far your blood sugar is above or below a certain target. Let's assume that the target blood sugar is 120. Now, if this is an unfamiliar concept to you, there's another video linked in the description that goes more in depth into correction ratios and how to use them, so be sure to check that out if this doesn't quite make sense. Also remember that correction ratios and carb to insulin ratios will vary from person to person based on their individual needs, so be sure to consult your doctor on which you should use. In order to use the correction ratio, we take the target blood sugar and subtract the current blood sugar to give us the difference. We then divide that number by the correction ratio to determine how many units of insulin we should remove from our total. We see here that we should remove 1.83 units from our total to account for our lower blood sugar. Alright, we are finally moving on to dinner, the last meal of the day. We are going to have some chicken legs, a couple of rolls, some peas, and a slice of pumpkin pie for dessert. Go ahead and calculate the amount of carbs in each of these foods, and then we'll walk through it together. Perfect, we'll start with the chicken. It has 4 grams of carbohydrates and no fiber or sugar alcohols, and the serving size is the same as what we were planning on having, so that's pretty easy, it's just 4 grams of carbs. Now onto the peas. We see that they have 22 grams of carbs per serving and 6 grams of fiber. So we take the carbs and subtract off the fiber and we get 16 grams of carbs per serving. However, the serving size is 1 cup and we are only going to have 3/4 of a cup. It's pretty simple to solve this since we can just multiply the carbs by 3/4. Now we have the net carbs in the serving that we are planning on having, which is 12 grams. For the rolls, they have 20 grams of carbs minus the 1 gram of fiber, coming to 19 grams net carbs per serving. However, we are planning on having a double serving, so we multiply by 2 to give us 38 grams of carbohydrates. And finally, the pie. This one is pretty simple as well. 30 grams of carbs minus the 2 grams of fiber, and we get 28 grams of net carbs. Great, now we can add all these numbers together. 4 plus 12 plus 38 plus 28 comes to 82 grams of carbs. That's not too bad for a dinner meal, but you could always decide not to have the pie or one of the rolls if you wanted to have fewer carbs. Now for the very last step. The meal totals 82 grams of carbs, and we'll stick with the 1:5 insulin to carb ratio. And there we go, 16.4 units of insulin. But wait, it looks like our blood sugar is currently 195. I guess that soda earlier raised it more than we had expected. So, what do we do to account for the fact that we are going into this meal with a blood sugar that is already high? We use our correction ratio again. Okay, to use this correction ratio, we're going to take the current blood sugar and subtract the target blood sugar. Since we're now correcting for a higher reading, we subtract the target instead of subtracting the current blood sugar. We see here that the difference is 75. Now we take the difference and divide it by the correction ratio, and we get 2.5. That is the number of units of insulin that we will add on to our meal dose to help account for the higher blood sugar. So we have 16.4 units from the meal and 2.5 from the correction ratio, totaling 18.9 units. Great job, that was a whole day's worth of carb counting in about 15 minutes. And I promise that it will get easier. I do almost all this math daily and often completely in my head, so you'll get to where it's just second nature as well. And if you're eating many of the same things, then you'll probably already have the carb counts memorized and don't have to count them individually each time. And remember that mistakes will probably happen at one point or another, nobody's perfect. Just remember to always keep an eye on your blood sugar and correct as needed. If you're looking for more practice and resources, remember to watch the other video linked in the description that goes through each step of carb counting in a little more detail, and also view the Type 1 Diabetes Explained website at t1dexplained.org. As always, thanks for watching, and have a great day.